believe your work dovetails neatly into work that Val Curran is doing at UCL. She's also working with MDMA and is doing work into cannabidiol-based antipsychotic medications. She's working with GW Pharmaceuticals in this country to develop that medication. Are you working in tandem? You must be aware of each other's work.
What is her name?
My name's Martin.
No,
her name's Val Curran.
The woman?
Dr. Val Curran at University College London.
Can you say her name again? I'm sorry.
Dr. Valerie Curran.
Valerie Curran.
Yes, of course. Yes, I know who she is. Yes, I am definitely aware of her work. You know, CBD really deserves to be studied and funded. It's a very important part of cannabis, and part of the problem is that it's sort of been bred out of most of the strains. You know, everybody just wants to get high and they're focusing on THC. The CBD seems to ameliorate some of the THC effects and bring it down a little bit. But in terms of psychiatry and anxiety disorders and psychotic disorders, CBD is much more interesting to us than THC. And I'm definitely aware of Valerie's work, yes.
Thank you.
There's a question at the back.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to ask what the reasoning behind choosing MDMA and cannabis was for your work, as opposed to any number of other compounds you could have chosen, such as LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, etc.
Right, that's a good question. I know that the sort of classic hallucinogens like LSD or psilocybin can really help people get to the places they need to go. But you know, my complaint with LSD actually is that it lasts like 12, 15 hours, and you know, as a therapist, I don't want to sit there that long. I mean, one of the nice things about MDMA is it's really just 3 or 4 hours, but the other thing is that it's a very subtle shift in consciousness. You know, you could still sort of get on the phone and talk to your mother or whatever, like you're not totally out of your mind. But the most important thing to me is that you remember you've got complete attention for the therapy session. And not only do you remember everything that was said in the therapy session, but you've got really good retention and recollection for the traumas that happened. I mean, and because it's a methamphetamine base, you're very focused, you've got good concentration, your memory is good, but also you want to talk, you want to connect, you're chatting. And also because it's got this increased oxytocin component, you feel very connected to the people around you. So one of the great sort of byproducts or side effects is that you've got this enhanced therapeutic alliance where you're more connected with your therapist. You don't get that with LSD or psilocybin. So, and that's really important. There's sort of this feeling that you like love everybody and you love everything around you, and oh my God, that wallpaper's so beautiful. But it also sort of comes back to you that you love yourself more. You've got more self-acceptance. And I don't know that you necessarily get that with LSD or psilocybin. I really feel like MDMA is uniquely qualified as a catalyst to psychotherapy. It does things the other hallucinogens don't. And also, it's less altering and scary for people. You know, you sort of trip. It can be scary. It can be, some people get anxious, some people get agitated. With MDMA, it's much more predictable and controllable, and it's more of a subtle shift. So it's less intimidating for the therapist also, not just the research subjects or the patients.
Thank you. Got a question over there.
Hi, Julie. I'm really interested in the work that you're doing with regards to talking therapies with you under the influence of MDMA and what have you. And one thing that I'm curious about in your control groups that you used, did any of your were any of the users or your patients, had they had any prior experience or use of MDMA, and does that have any effect on the benefits or the outcomes?
That's a good question. You know, there are some research protocols where they insist that people aren't naive, that they have had experience, and then there are some where, you know, they want to make sure they've never had it. And we didn't necessarily have this thing where you couldn't have ever done it. But most of these veterans haven't taken ecstasy. And most of the people in the research that got published already, the original, when it wasn't combat related, they didn't have experience either. And you know, there's pros and cons. The best thing about somebody never having had MDMA is that first experience is sort of the biggest one you're ever going to have, where you, I'm sorry to use this sort of vernacular, but it's like, you know, you shoot your load of serotonin. Like anything that you had just first comes out. And it's the most serotonin your brain is ever going to see is that first MDMA experience. So it's kind of nice if people haven't had it before. You know, the way the brain, the synapses are set up, there's something called like a presynaptic and a postsynaptic. There's brain cells before the GABA and brain cells after the GABA. And the ones before have got all the serotonin sort of loaded up and ready to go. It never really comes out, but when you're given MDMA, it all comes out, it gets flooded. So that's what's great about having somebody MDMA naive. The other thing is that you don't necessarily want preconceived notions or previous experiences. You know, the placebo effect is very strong and very real, especially in psychiatry. So it's kind of nice if they don't know what they're getting themselves into, and they don't, if they've had it before and they think they're supposed to dance around for 4 hours, they may not have as good a therapy session. You know, or if they had a bad experience, if they had anxiety, then they're going to be more anxious about it. So we didn't, you know, these protocols don't specify whether they have to be MDMA naive or not, but I think it's kind of better if they are.
Okay, thank you. Can I take another round of questions? I've got one here, then one there.
Is this
Somebody
on?
else? And somebody else. Okay.
Hello, how's it going? This question is, oh sorry, actually firstly, MAPS actually has a presence today. So if anyone
Hello,
knows,
Max.
hello, I don't actually work for MAPS, I just kind of help them out sometimes. But we've got a stall outside, so if anyone wants to, there's some information, and also if you want to support in any way, there's a donation thing that you'll see. So my question is actually to anyone on the panel. We've heard about you know, prohibition from a law enforcement perspective and from sort of working within the medical establishment, but no one's really talked about is you know, the mystical experiences people can have with especially psychedelics, and whether there's scope for a legalization movement sort of based around, or you know, studies being done based around that, you know, showing that they definitely cause mystical experiences to happen, and then seeing if using, you know, human rights laws, I know we've talked about that a bit, but is there a reason that these studies aren't being done? Is it, you know, would it make sense for people to do studies like they did, you know, in the 60s, I think in Harvard, where, you know, you can show people have mystical experiences, thereby proving, hopefully, that they are sort of legitimate spiritual technologies?
I can answer this if anybody else on the panel wants to. I'm happy to cede.
Go ahead, Julie. Tell them about the 40-year dark age.
So there's a man named Roland Griffiths, Griffiths, Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins University, who has been doing just exquisite studies giving psilocybin, which is sort of the key ingredient in magic mushrooms, giving psilocybin to people to show that they can reliably and safely engender a mystical experience. And he's published 2 papers now, the first showing, like, yes, it was a very intense religious experience for people, and then the second paper saying, you know, a year later, these guys still say that it was a very profound experience and that they've made life changes because of this spiritual experience. So it's, you know, it's hard to study and quantify spirituality, but the Johns Hopkins group has really done a great job, and they've gotten really good press coverage from it too. They've done a good job, and their work is sponsored by Hefter.org, HEFFTER.org.
I'd also, I'm sorry to do this, but to add like sort of a cynical anthropological take on that question as well. So there is this research going on. I think Julie's right. I think it's very clear that many of these substances do induce like real mystical states, however you want to define that. But as a term, in terms of it being a good argument against prohibition, I'm not so convinced, because I'm not so convinced that the powers that be, maybe they don't want me to say this, but that the powers that be really necessarily want everybody going around having mystical experiences all the time. Because of course, when you have lots of mystical experiences, then you start to realize like, hey, wait a minute. This messed up world system that we have right now isn't the only game in town, and perhaps, and, you know, it's only a very narrow slice of reality. I'd like to think we live in a world where that would be a great argument in favor of ending prohibition laws, but I'm a little bit more cynical than that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing I always say is that psychedelics are subversive, you know, and I don't think the government is interested in having you look outside the box. So, you know, I think this is one of the reasons why I mean, it's very easy for me to sort of focus on, well, treat this like a medicine to treat this disease. You know, I don't want to talk about spirituality or waking up and, you know, realizing none of this matters. And also, if you're trying to get, you know, it's just easier to sort of work within the models that are available. You know, with FDA, if you've got an illness and a treatment, you can go ahead and do research. And, you know, it's very true that all of these medicines could treat people who aren't sick, who just want to be smarter or better or, you know, anything. But there's no real mechanism for that kind of research. So, I mean, that's why Roland's work is so impressive, too, is that he is looking at things that other people aren't.
More questions?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Hello, I
Hi.
can.
I did. Great teeth, by the way. That's one thing Europe can take from America for sure. Getting past the moral outrage of sending people off to illegal wars and then denying them the treatment that they need afterwards. 300,000 people is every single person in my home city. That's quite a stat. And looking at the more practical side of things, two questions. Firstly, I read some stuff. I'm no expert. I just read someone saying that ecstasy has been associated with anxiety. Not the reverse. Maybe that's a simple thing like dosage. But secondly, I'm really interested in how old the study is, because having had knowing a little bit about CBT and therapy and that kind of thing, I know that relapse is a very common thing, and so when you use the word cured, it's quite a big deal, because they say, you know, people don't get cured. What they do is they get a little bit better, and then they have to fight to make sure they don't end up back in that place. And CBT, people often say that it's just a sticking pad. So I'm wondering how long ago the study was done, and have you checked back in again with those people to make sure that, you know, it's not just a kind of temporary quick fix? Because if what you're saying is correct, and I have no reason to doubt it, then it's amazing. And on behalf of anyone who's experienced anxiety or depression, I feel it's kind of almost immoral to deny those people that help.
The second part is that the longest we've looked at people right now is 1 year, but I think there is a plan to look at 3 years and 5 years and check back in and see how people are doing. In terms of the anxiety issue, acutely, when someone takes MDMA, you can get anxious as you're starting to sort of shift over into another altered state, and you can get nervous about that. But the bigger issue with anxiety and MDMA is really sort of chronic ecstasy use, people who are taking it weekend after weekend, night after night. Their serotonergic systems sort of get overloaded and taxed and depleted, and then you can get into anxiety states and panic disorder and pretty bad depressions. And I'm sure you guys are seeing this in the UK. You know, I have people come to my office every once in a while who just taken too much ecstasy, and they end up needing antidepressants because they've sort of given themselves a chronic anxiety disorder or a depressive disorder. So, you know, it's really important that people don't take this too often, too much. You have to be very, very judicious in your use. And, you know, the problem with it being illegal is that you have no idea what you're getting when you buy it. And that's a huge, you know, anytime you're getting a white powder, it could be anything. And, you know, this is really because of our drug policy that we're creating more dangers.
Hiya, Julie. I'm interested to hear how you address concerns around providing vulnerable people with a substance which they wouldn't be able to acquire legally afterwards. Was there any kind of sort of aftercare program in sort of showing people how they would be able to deal with situations which, through the therapy, they become accustomed to dealing through the kind of safe, emotional properties that they would have when they took MDMA?
Right. Well, you know, the MDMA, it's not like Prozac where you take it every day and you need it, you to treat your symptoms. I mean, this is really the tool is the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. It's the therapy that goes on for 16 sessions, and 3 out of those 16, you've got MDMA on board, so you can get to a deeper place. But one of the nice things about MDMA is that you can sort of get back to that state a little bit on your own. It's somewhat subtle, but if you have it 2 or 3 times, you do have sort of a sense, like okay, well, I can feel this relaxed. I can take a deep breath. I can be this calm. So, there's some people who do hypnosis with MDMA where they'll sort of remind people that you can get back to this place on your own without the MDMA. And we're not doing that in the post-traumatic stress disorder studies, but the most important thing I think is that afterwards they stay in touch with the therapist and they keep having therapy. I mean, a lot of the work here is just debriefing and talking about what happened and accepting it, having some measure of, okay, well, this happened, but it's not going to define me and I can move on. So a lot of what they get from the therapy, they keep.
Hello. I thought your comparison with MDMA being like an anesthetic was interesting and kind of curious, because it seems like there's a fundamental difference between somebody with PTSD and somebody with a tumour, which is that if you take the tumour out, then you can do a test. A doctor can do a test and work out whether or not you're ill or not. Whereas with a mental health issue, you have to be actively engaged in knowing whether or not you feel better. So it just seemed like to me, it seems like the real value of something like MDMA or even psychedelics in this context was that you are actively engaged in the process. It's not something that somebody can just give you in a passive sense. You can't just lie there.
No, right? No, I mean, you really, you have. I mean, one of the metaphors that I use with MDMA is it's like it sort of turns you into like a house with all the lights on and all the doors unlocked, but you have to sort of figure out what closet things are hiding in. You have to look around, but you've got the best lighting and a good guide. So it's not nearly as passive as you lie there and the doctor pulls the tumor out. I mean, the whole thing about psychotherapy is it's sort of like you're digging together at an archaeological site and you keep coming up with things, and then you have to figure out where they fit and what it is. And you work together. One of the great things I said about this increased oxytocin is that you bond with the person you're digging with, and you really believe that they want to help you and they're in there with you, and that feeling of connection carries over to the sessions that don't involve MDMA, where you're still working together very diligently with the therapist. So it's definitely a team thing. And with Michael and Annie, it was the 3 of them all working together.